Testing 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Okay, hello, my name is Tegan Carnwath. I go to Snow College, and who am I here today with?
My name's Margaret. I am the Health Equalities Coordinator with the Church's Trust.
Is it okay if I ask you some questions?
Yeah, of course it is.
Okay, so what motivated you to get into the work that you do?
So I started working in the community as a volunteer through a project I was participating in. That project started about 5 years ago, and it made me realise the value of community work. And then after being a participant for a couple of years, I started to volunteer with that project and moved on and started doing my degree in community development, and then I was offered a position with the Church's Trust.
What are some common misconceptions about working mothers?
The most common one would probably be that children are not having enough time with their parents, especially if their mother's out working. I think a lot of the time, I was even watching something over the past few days, a series, and the mother was portrayed as pretty neglectful because she had a full-time career, basically. And I think that does run down through then, and that's just reiterating it and reinforcing that sort of stigma.
Yeah.
Where I feel like, yes, it is difficult to capture that or sort of find a balance, but just because you have a career doesn't mean that you're not a good mother as well.
What barriers did you face when joining in employment?
Well, I think we can all say that the biggest barrier to any woman joining employment would be childcare.
Yeah.
The cost of childcare over the last few years especially has risen astronomically. Sometimes it's just not worth going out to work because you're spending pretty much your entire wage on childcare.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have supportive family, maybe have grandparents and stuff like that can step in and help to decrease that. But there's still a lot of people out there who maybe can't even have more than one child.
Yeah.
Because they know if they go back to work, they can't afford childcare bills.
Have you ever been discriminated against because of being an employed mother?
I have in the past, yeah. I think there's no real leeway there for, if a child's sick or if a child has an appointment. And I think it comes down to whoever is managing you. In my experience anyway, my old employer didn't have children, so didn't understand that, especially as a single mother, that all of that responsibility fell on me. And she just expected me, like for example, would have expected me to ask my childminder to take the children to the doctor's appointments, which is completely, it's not a realistic thing to expect the childminder to do. So I think from that respect, that's probably the biggest discriminatory part. It's very difficult for working mothers to find jobs that work around children being at school and trying to cut those costs of childminding, and then for to face that sort of discrimination then when you do eventually find a role that suits. It's not nice.
In what ways does representation in media affect perception of working mothers?
So in the media we will see two different perceptions or two different representations of women. You'll see either the really successful high-flying woman who is not a mother and can give all her time to her career, or you will see the mother who is neglecting her children or appears to be neglecting her children, when in reality they're not. They're just not there 24/7. It's about finding that balance. I know I've said that before. And then the other side of it is that you'll see the mother who doesn't work or is working, minimum wage, 12 hours, 16 hours, whatever it is, and wants to be there for their child. Neither is negative. Both have their own sort of benefits. And I think everything needs to be weighed up in both situations, because when you look at the like of the childcare that we talked about a minute ago, often that parent who's working 16 hours can't afford to pay childcare for any more than 16 hours, so can't go out and work in a 40-hour-a-week job or whatever it is. So I think it's just there is a real perception there of the difference between women rather than just mothers, but also the two different types of mothers as well. Mothers don't need to be neglectful to have a good career.
How difficult is it to balance work and home life?
It's very difficult. I recently started with the Church's Trust just in October past. And previous to that, I was only working a part-time job. So, when I was starting to get ready to leave my old job and come in here, people kept saying, oh, it's going to be a really tough challenge moving from part-time to full-time. And I was like, it'll be fine, it'll be grand, we'll get on with it. I did not expect it to be as difficult as it was. It's just keeping on top of everything, making sure the children are okay. They obviously need me to be there for them as well.
Yeah.
As well as doing my job, doing whatever else has to be done. So it's very difficult, but I think we're starting to see a routine now. So it does take a wee while, and it will take for anybody that is, thinking of going into full-time employment with children. It will take a while, but it's manageable.
Yeah. Do you feel discriminated as a woman in the workplace?
In my current role, no. I don't think. I think obviously one of the values of community development is equality.
Yeah.
So it would be really bad if you were working in a community organisation and were discriminated against.
Yeah.
It's something that we try to strive to uphold at all times. And I haven't come across any discrimination. I don't feel anyway against anyone since I started with the Church's Trust.
Have you faced any backlash or negative comments for being on maternity leave?
Not negative comments as such, but in one of my previous jobs when I was going off to have my daughter, who is 16 now, I was told in no uncertain terms. I was working full time before I found out that I was pregnant, and I was told in no uncertain terms that there was not a part-time role available for me in the company. I had worked for the same manager for 6 or 7 years, and really, helped him out if he was covered for him, if he needed shifts covered. I felt like I had done everything the way it should have been done. And then for him, and I mean, he told me that the day I told him I was pregnant. So I worked as supervisor for another 7 months before, 7.5, 8 months before I went off maternity leave. And I think then that I had to go back full time when she was 8 months old. And it was just too difficult because of late nights and, it was hours in that job because it was a supervisory role in a shop. It wasn't nice. It really wasn't nice. But again, coming back to what I said earlier, somebody who didn't have children didn't understand the dynamic. Yeah.
How does your employer tackle situations like childcare emergencies or family emergencies?
My current employer is brilliant. I've had 2 times now since I started, I've had to kind of up and leave quite quickly because of children and school and stuff. And there's been no issue at all. Just go and do it, and no problem. As long as your work's getting done, I think, as long as you work with them too. I would be quite willing to help them out if they need me later on in an evening or anything like that. So I think that sort of stuff you kind of need to go both ways as well.
What is some advice for working mothers?
I think advice for working mothers is really tough because it depends what kind of, it depends on their situation really. Like the advice I would be giving a working mother with a baby would be completely different to the advice I'd be giving to a working mother with children. The advice you could give someone who's working part-time and full-time is different. Somebody said to me whenever I was doing that changeover from part-time to full-time, don't worry about the house. The house doesn't need to be spotless all the time.
Yeah.
And that is something that I've had to learn
Mhm.
over the last couple of months, that actually no, the house doesn't need to be spotless all the time.
Yeah.
People live in the house. There's dishes that are going to be sitting there because we've just had dinner. You know, you have to have a bit of self-compassion for yourself, and realise that actually if you need to sit down and have an hour's rest, then that's what's best for you, and ultimately going to be best for your children as well.
Yeah.
The other thing is there's a big, I'm sure you've heard the phrase mom guilt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big thing for working mothers, especially because you do spend so much time away from them now. In my case, my children are at school when I'm at work.
Yeah.
There's only about an hour in the day that they're at home when I'm not at home.
Yeah.
And obviously they're that bit older. But, you know, for someone who's gone back to work with a wee baby and having to pay a childminder or having to hand that wee child over to a grandparent or an aunt or something, I think that's when the mom guilt kicks in. Or if you have to start doing extra hours because there's a big project on, or, you know, but you have to realise that actually, you know, you're doing that for the better.
Yeah.
For you and your children to have a better life. It's not just for you.
Yeah.
So I think you have to measure it up and see if it's worth, if the outcome's worth the risk or the work that you're putting in.
Yeah. Have you ever felt frightened for your safety in the city?
Yeah, definitely. After the events of last year, after there was a few attacks in very short succession in October around Halloween time.
Yeah.
Very, very scary for all women in the city. My daughter is, as I've said already, she's 16, and even letting her go into town on her own, stuff like that, I stopped all of that because of the fear. Because you just don't know.
Can you give an example of a positive experience you have had which has helped you feel more comfortable in the town?
So probably off the back of those attacks, I attended, there was a vigil in the city centre, the Guildhall Square, in, I want to say early November, the first week of November I think it was. And just how dare people come together and told whoever was, you know, responsible for those attacks that we're not taking it. And especially at that event, there was a lot of men there, which was fantastic to see, because a lot of those kind of vigils that you see are mostly women. But we needed the men to come out and say, well, we're not accepting this either. So that definitely made me feel a bit more comfortable.
How can people in the city support you or your organisation in supporting equality?
I think just by treating people equally, regardless of ability, you know, gender, sexuality, any of that. But also by using our services, because a lot of the services with the Church's Trust promote equality through education and awareness.
What's one thing you would like to see change in the city for working mothers?
Definitely the cost of childcare. Thankfully I'm past it now at this stage with my two, but I just think it's putting a lot of people off working, and also putting people out of the ability to work. Also, you know, if you're working and your wages are only covering childcare, what, you know, you cannot totally understand that there's no real sense in going to work if that's what you're paying out.
How do you think young people can bring about positive changes in the city?
I think young people being more involved in their communities can help to bring positive changes. I think being more accepting of others that aren't like themselves can also help. I know the Church's Trust Youth team here do a fantastic range of programs. There's not just one or two, but across the board I think it's that community, and that's how we're going to get the change to be made. And across the city, not just in their individual communities, because if we're bringing people together from all different communities, then we're going to see a much bigger effect.
That's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and do this interview with me. It was lovely meeting you.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.